Eve had a secret daughter who was so powerful she actually defeated God himself. Sound crazy? Well, she reveals that this God that billions worship today is actually your enemy, hiding behind a cosmic mask. I'm not kidding. This comes straight from a banned ancient text called The Reality of the Rulers. This text was banned by the church and buried for over 1,500 years because it exposes something the church doesn't want you to know. This world is not what you think it is. The reality of the rulers reveals that our existence is a prison, a counterfeit, a fake reality built by evil beings known as archons. And these guys, they're not gods, they're imposters, fakes, they're corrupted entities who created this world to keep humanity trapped in ignorance, enslaved to their will. And their greatest fear is that you'll wake up. But why hide this? Why erase Eve's daughter from existence? Well, when you're trying to control an entire species, the last thing you want is some divine badass figuring out the game and ruining the whole thing. But this isn't just some ancient myth, because hidden within this story is a secret that has everything to do with you. See, Eve's secret daughter wasn't just some rebel against the gods, she was a blueprint, a symbol of the power buried inside you. So the real question isn't just who was Eve's secret daughter, it's who or what are you? And more importantly, what happens when you remember? Okay, to understand this story, you need to know something about some of the earliest Christians known as the Gnostics. Now, the Gnostic Christians, they actually formed secret societies. They were rebels, spiritual radicals. And unlike your local church, they weren't fans of the Old Testament God. Actually, they hated him. Why? Because according to them, he's not actually God. Yeah, the God that billions of people pray to today, the one who demands worship and sacrifice and smites people over eating the wrong fruit? Not the real deal. The Gnostics said he was an imposter, basically a cosmic con artist who tricked humanity into worshiping him. And this world, a fake reality ruled by the archons, dark beings who feed off human ignorance and suffering, built to keep us blind, obedient, and most importantly, ignorant of our true power. But the Gnostics knew something else too, that you are more powerful than the God you were told to worship. Hard to believe? Of course it is, because the world has been rigged to make sure you never even consider the possibility, which is precisely why the church needed these texts gone. Because once you know the truth, once you realize you're not some insignificant pawn, but something way more powerful, the game is over. Too bad for them though, because in 1945, someone went digging near the tombs of Egypt and discovered a whole treasure trove of these heretical Gnostic books. And among them was a book called The Reality of the Rulers. And now, after 1,500 years of forced silence, we can finally uncover what they didn't want you to know. Are you ready? So before we can understand who Eve's secret daughter is and what you really are, we have to know what this reality is in the first place and who controls it. So think of this like the prologue. See, the reality of the rulers, it kicks off by revealing who the real enemy is. In the first line, it says, "Our contest is not against flesh and blood, but against the authorities of the universe and the spirits of wickedness." Basically, this means that your fight isn't against the people around you, it's against cosmic rulers, invisible forces who've been running the show behind the scenes. That alone is pretty wild, but it gets even more twisted here, because the one running this cosmic horror show is a being called the Demiurge, which means creator or craftsman. He's also named Ialdabaoth or Samael, meaning God of the blind. Why blind? Because this guy is so delusionally full of himself that he thinks he's the most powerful being in existence. It's like arguing with some guy on Twitter who's 100% wrong and gets all his info from memes. So here's exactly what happened. The Demiurge, drunk on his own ego, says, "I am God, there is no other but me." Well, does that kind of sound familiar? Yeah, that's the same line your Sunday school teacher said was spoken by God. Turns out they forgot to mention that their God might just be the bad guy. So the reality of the rulers is saying the God of the Bible is actually the ignorant Demiurge. And soon we'll see why Eve's secret daughter was the greatest threat this false God had ever faced. Now, the moment he declared, "I am God and there is no other," the text says, when he said this, he sinned against all. Why was this a sin against everything? Well, because everything is divine. And he was trying to claim divinity for himself and deny that anything else is divine. Basically, if the Demiurge was a person, he'd be on Truth Social posting rants in all caps every day about how he's the greatest. Anyway, this was blasphemy. This was the first sin. Think about it. Before Eden, before the serpent, before humanity even existed, it wasn't Eve who sinned. It wasn't Adam, it was God. How is that possible? Well, the reality of the rulers is about to drop a huge bombshell here. The God, the demiurge, this being was an imposter, an architect of a fake reality who just mistook himself for being the absolute. But the true God is actually a being of light, pure light, called the One. In fact, the Gnostics believed it wasn't even right to think of it as God because it's more than just God. It's the source of all existence. But the demiurge's words reached all the way up to the true, incorruptible realms of light, the real source of reality. And what happened? He basically got a cosmic fact check. A voice echoed down and said, "You are wrong, Samael. That is God of the blind." This wasn't just embarrassing, this shattered his whole reality. And how did the demiurge handle this? Does he reflect, grow, learn, apologize? No, he has a full-down divine meltdown. The text says explicitly, his thoughts became blind, and having expelled his power, that is, the blasphemy he had spoken, he pursued it down to chaos and the abyss, his mother. Basically, this means he didn't listen and actually doubled down on his stupidity. Just like that one guy arguing with you on Twitter again. Then he went down into the realms of chaos. See, the higher realms of light are basically watching this cosmic disaster unfold, and they see the demiurge having a full-blown tantrum after getting called out, and they realize, oh, great, this guy's gonna be a big problem, isn't he? And so what does he do next? He starts giving birth to henchmen, because what do insecure tyrants do when they get exposed? They surround themselves with sycophants to tell them that they're important. And just like that, the archons are born. See, they exist to enforce the demiurge's rule, to keep this illusion going, and most importantly, to make sure that humanity never figures out the truth. So the higher realms of light see all this and are like, oh great, it's not just one blind god now, he spawned a whole army. So what happens next? Well, the higher realms of light are populated by immensely powerful beings known as eons, and eons are way more powerful than the demiurge. So why don't they just come down and kick his ass? Well, see, these chaos realms can be like a trap. When these beings of light descend into the realms of darkness, there's a chance they could become weakened, corrupted, or stuck there. Now, Sophia is one of the eons, and she's a high-ranking divine force, way beyond gods, angels, or archons. If the ultimate unknowable reality, the source of existence, is like the sun, then Sophia would be like one of its brightest rays. Her name literally means wisdom, and being way smarter than the demiurge, she figures out a workaround to all this. Instead of wiping him out, she uses the archons to bring some order to all the chaos. The reality of the rulers says she established each of his offspring in conformity with its power after the pattern of the realms that are above, for by starting from the invisible world, the visible world was invented. Basically, this means that Sophia brought some structure onto chaos. She makes the archons organize themselves in a hierarchy and patterns that mimic the divine realms above. So within this new structure, the demiurge and the archons, they create the material world. And it's kind of like a knockoff of the higher realms of light. But here's what the rulers didn't see coming. See, since Sophia structured chaos based on the divine realms, it meant there would always be a crack in the illusion. And through this crack, someone would emerge, someone they couldn't control. A daughter of Eve who would burn their fake kingdom to the ground. And here's where the first crack appears. See, after this knockoff of the divine realm is set up, the material world, something incredible happens. See, the perfection of the divine realm becomes reflected in the material world, but only as a reflection. So the demiurge and the archons, they see the reflection of the perfect realm in the waters, and they become totally obsessed with it. They want it bad, but there's a little problem here. It's just a reflection. They can't reach it, they can't touch it, and they definitely can't control it. Why not? The text says, but they could not lay hold of that image which had appeared to them in the waters, because of their weakness, since beings that merely have souls cannot lay hold of those that have spirit, for they were from below, while it was from above. So the archons, these false gods, these rulers of the material world, they don't have spirit. They have souls, sure, but soul isn't enough. They were incomplete. But you might be wondering, what is the difference between soul and spirit? It's a good question. The soul you can think of kind of like the mind. It gives beings personality, emotions, desires, and it allows them to think and feel. The archons had souls, but the spirit is something different. Spirit is the eternal, unchanging, divine spark or essence. It's basically like the transcendent part of us that's inherently connected to the divine source of all reality. In other words, it's our divine self. And this right here is why the demiurge and his rulers feared humanity so much. But let's not get a hold of ourselves here. How did humanity get created in the first place? Now we're getting closer to Eve's secret daughter, and what happens next is about to change everything. According to the reality of the rulers, the creation of humanity is not exactly how you learned about it in church. The reflection of the perfect realms. See, they drove the archons crazy because they couldn't get to it. So they decided, hey, if we can't have it, we'll copy it. The text says, the rulers laid plans and said, come, let us create a human that will be soil from the earth. They modeled their creature as one wholly of the earth. So they basically made an earthly copy of divinity in the form of humanity. But there's something important here. The text describes these cosmic rulers like this. The rulers have bodies that are both female and male, and faces that are the faces of beasts. Now, this description is actually really important here because check this out. In the Bible, in Genesis, we see a very similar phrase. When God says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, male and female, he created them. So hold on a minute. Our image? Who's the us here? See, this verse implies there were multiple gods, ones that are male and female. And for centuries, the church has tried desperately to try and explain this away. But the reality of the rulers, it paints a much darker picture. These weren't divine beings, but the archons themselves. They were the ones shaping humanity. And their beastly faces, that symbolizes their connection to the material world, their base nature. These weren't benevolent creators. They're predators, cosmic scavengers, looking to shape humanity in their own corrupted image. And they thought they could build humans into perfect, obedient little slaves. So these rulers get together and they hatch a plan. They took some soil from the earth and modeled their man after their body and after the image of God that had appeared to them in the waters. Humanity was initially designed to be weak material copies, empty shells that resembled the divine reflection but didn't have its true power. It's like buying something on Temu. The ad looks great, but when you get it, you realize it's cheap as hell. So the rulers, they were ignorant, thinking they could create divine perfection. So after forming this man from dirt, they declared, come, let us give this creature a soul. So they breathed into him, and yeah, they managed to give Adam a soul. But here's the thing, Adam just laid there, unmoving on the ground. They failed completely at making him rise. The text literally says they could not make him rise because of their powerlessness. So this was pretty humiliating for the archons. Here are these cosmic beings claiming to be gods, yet they can't even get their own creation to move. So what did they do? They blew into him like storm winds, desperately trying to make him stand, frantically trying to capture that divine spark they glimpsed reflected in the waters, but nothing could get him up, not even their cosmic Viagra. They thought that the divine was something they could simply copy or control, but it was totally beyond them. So at this point, humanity was just a pile of dirt with a lifeless soul, like a failed puppet lying uselessly on the ground. But then a mysterious spirit comes down from the true realm. Now, pay close attention to what the text says next, because it changes everything that you thought you knew about Adam. Afterward, the Spirit saw the man of soul on the ground. The Spirit came forth from the adamantine land. It descended and came to dwell in him, and that man became a living soul, and the Spirit called his name Adam, since he was found moving upon the ground. Alright, so now suddenly Adam can move. But why? Because this voice wasn't from the demiurge's fake low-budget Wish.com heaven. This was the real divine realm intervening, waking Adam up, and Spirit dwelled within him. In other words, this is the moment that soul and spirit first merged. Because before, this Adam was just a body with a soul, incomplete. The spirit is what connects Adam to the true source. Without it, he was just like another beast. But with it, he became something the rulers feared. And this is why they panicked. And here's where things get strange, because these rulers decide to test Adam. The text says, the rulers gathered together all the animals of the earth and all the birds of heaven and brought them to Adam to see what Adam would call them. So you probably remember this part from the regular Bible, right? Adam names the animals, but here they're essentially testing him in his intelligence because they're clearly afraid that he might be too smart. And so they rushed to try and control the situation. They told Adam that he could eat from any tree, but not the tree of knowledge or he'd die. Now that he has the power of spirit, they don't want him to get the knowledge of what he really is and who they really are. But here's the crazy and kind of funny part, actually. The reality of the rulers said this was all actually in line with the plan from the true divine realm of light. Why? Because they didn't realize that by forbidding the tree of knowledge, they were actually making sure that Adam would eventually eat from it. In other words, as soon as you're told not to do something, you're definitely going to do it. The text literally says, they said this to him, but they did not understand what they said. Rather, they said this in such a way that he might in fact eat. Basically, they just did some cosmic reverse psychology without even knowing it. But hold on, because there's more here. Because the rulers wanted to make sure Adam could never wake up. So here comes another twist, and it's huge. They removed the spirit from Adam and discovered it was in the form of a divine spiritual woman. The text says, they opened his side, which was like a living woman, and they built up his side with some flesh in place of her, and Adam came to be only with Saul. Do you get how crazy this is? See, Adam wasn't just male originally, he was both. He had a divine feminine spirit within him. The rulers literally tore this spiritual feminine force out of Adam and replaced her with flesh. So Adam woke up weak, incomplete, totally disconnected from true spiritual knowledge. But who was this divine woman? It was Eve. See, that's right. According to Gnostics, Eve wasn't made from Adam's rib. Eve was a divine spirit, a goddess of life, and she was the one who gave life to Adam in the first place. Talk about a plot twist, and here's the craziest part. The spiritual woman, the divine Eve, she didn't vanish, she returned and confronted Adam directly, waking him up again. She says, "Rise, Adam." And Adam right away figures out that it's because of her power that he had life. Adam said, "It is you who have given me life. You will be called Mother of the Living, for she is my mother. She is the physician and the woman, and she has given birth." This is huge. Adam realizes she, the spiritual Eve, not the demiurge, is his true life giver, his spiritual mother. So here's the part where the demiurge and the archons get gross and horny. The authorities came up to their Adam. When they saw his female partner speaking with him, they became very excited and enamored of her. They're basically cosmic stalkers, total creeps, and they said, "Come, let us sow our seed in her." They're basically trying to slide into her DMs with dick pics. But guess what happens? The spiritual Eve finds them ridiculous and actually laughs in their face. She laughed at them for their foolishness and blindness. So the spiritual Eve actually leaves behind a fake version of herself, like a lower copy. The text says, a shadowy reflection resembling herself. And this was to trick the demiurge and the archons. So in a nutshell, she basically leaves behind a lower physical version of herself behind, and the archons fell for it. And so while they're being gross, getting it on with the material Eve, the spiritual Eve enters into the tree of knowledge. But just when you think it couldn't get stranger, it does, because the spiritual Eve returns again as, you guessed it, the serpent. That's right, the snake, the infamous figure that's the bad guy in every Sunday school lesson you've ever learned. But here the serpent is actually the teacher, the instructor, the good guy sent to free humanity. Then the female spiritual presence came in the form of the snake, the instructor, and it taught them, saying, "What did he say to you? Was it from every tree in the garden shall you eat, but from the tree of recognizing evil and good do not eat?" So now the physical material Eve responds, and she's clearly afraid and conditioned by the rulers. Not only did he say, "Don't eat," but even "Don't touch it. For the day you eat from it, you will surely die." Now notice something critical here. This conversation between the serpent and the material Eve is basically a conversation between Eve and her higher self. See here, the serpent actually represents the higher self urging you to seek knowledge. The serpent said, "It is not the case that you will shortly die, for out of jealousy he said this to you. Rather your eyes will open and you will be like gods, recognizing evil and good." Have you ever wondered why the tree of knowledge of good and evil was forbidden in the first place? Isn't that kind of weird? Why wouldn't God want humans to have knowledge? And especially the kind of knowledge that lets you know the difference between good and evil. Well, according to the Gnostics, that's because God is evil. He didn't want Adam and Eve to be able to tell the difference between good and evil because they'd recognize him for the crazy monster he is. Doesn't that make a lot more sense than the biblical story? The snake, the instructor here, is explicitly telling them the forbidden truth, that the so-called God has been lying out of jealousy. The very reason humans were kept away from knowledge was was because this ruler, this fraud, was terrified humans would realize they're divine and he's evil. Now, Eve, the material Eve, inspired by truth, takes action. And the woman of flesh took from the tree and ate. And she gave to her husband as well as herself, and those beings who possessed only a soul ate. But here's the thing, the moment they ate, they realized something. The text explicitly says, their imperfection became apparent in their lack of knowledge. They recognized they were naked of the spiritual, and they took fig leaves and bound them around themselves. So what this means is that Adam and Eve weren't ashamed of being physically naked. They were ashamed because eating from the tree made them see clearly that they lacked the spiritual. Then the chief ruler, the demiurge himself, arrives and says, Adam, where are you? For he did not understand what had happened. So think about that. This ruler, who's pretending to be an all-knowing God, is utterly clueless about where Adam is. And that's in the Bible itself, too, by the way. This apparently all-knowing God can't even win at a game of hide and seek. So Adam replies, and he's pretty freaked out right now, and said, I heard your voice and was afraid because I was naked and I hid. So the demiurge right away panics and accuses Adam. And oh, by the way, in the Bible, God actually asks Adam, who told you you were naked? Weird, right? Again, this makes no sense if we're talking about being physically naked, but makes perfect sense when you realize it's all about spiritual knowledge. The demiurge says, why did you hide unless it is because you have eaten from the tree from which alone I commanded you not to eat? You have eaten. So you know the story from here. Adam blames Eve blames the snake, and God flips out. So the rulers finally just expel Adam and Eve from the garden, and it throws humanity into chaos, distraction, and struggle. Why? The text says, they threw human beings into great distraction and into a life of toil, so that human beings might be occupied by worldly affairs and might not have the opportunity of being devoted to the Holy Spirit. This is the ultimate key to understanding your life right now. Have you ever wondered why you feel exhausted, distracted, spiritually disconnected? Because according to this banned text, it's not accidental, it's intentional. The entire system you live in today was constructed to keep you spiritually asleep, trapped in the illusion created by rulers who fear your spiritual awakening. And so how do you break out of that illusion? By liking and subscribing, of course, right now. And check out my book and downloads on inner transformation in the description of this video. But we're going to get to exactly how to break out in a bit. But we've reached one of the most shocking and hidden parts of the entire story. So pay close attention here, because this isn't just about Adam and Eve's children. It's about the powerful spiritual secret hidden behind their births. And when you understand it, you'll know exactly why this text was banned and hidden from you for centuries. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Adam and Eve's kids, right? Cain and Abel. Well, plot twist again, because according to some Gnostic texts, Cain and Abel were actually the offspring of when the demiurge and the archons messed around with the material version of Eve. Now, there are some variations to this story, but what most of them agree on is that Cain and Abel were not the true children of Adam and Eve. So then who were their real kids? According to the Gnostics, Adam and the spiritual Eve had another son and a secret daughter. And this is key to the entire story. See, Cain and Abel were the children from the material Eve and the archons. But now Adam and the spiritual Eve came together to birth their true children. Why is this so incredible? Because remember, the archons removed the spiritual Eve from Adam to limit humanity's power. But now Adam and the spiritual Eve are uniting once again, not in the same body this time, but through bearing children. And Adam knew his partner Eve, and she became pregnant and bore Seth to Adam, and she said, I have borne another man through God in place of Abel. This is huge here, because Seth isn't just another child, he symbolizes the union of Adam and Eve, soul and spirit finally coming together. Seth is humanity reborn spiritually, representing enlightenment and true knowledge. This is why Eve specifically says through God, not the fake God, but the source of existence. In other words, Seth's birth represents the first authentic spiritual awakening within humanity. Now, I have another video about Seth called Why Adam Believed God is the Devil, so watch that for more info on him. But now we finally arrive at the secret daughter, the child that's so powerful, so terrifying to the demiurge, that she would actually challenge the false god himself. Again, Eve became pregnant, and she bore Norea. And she said, "He has produced for me a virgin as an assistance for many generations of human beings. She is the virgin whom the forces did not defile." All right, did you hear that? Norea isn't just some forgotten biblical figure here. She was untouched by the dark cosmic rulers. Like Seth, Norea also represents the unity of soul and spirit. The very existence of Norea terrified the rulers because they don't have any power over her. Remember, they can't touch the spirit. She symbolizes the awakened consciousness within humanity that can't be corrupted, controlled, or defeated. When the text says she was produced as an assistance for many generations, it means that Norea represents the hidden knowledge inside of you, within all of us, that can break free from ignorance by reflecting and looking within. Norea is humanity's ultimate weapon against blindness and ignorance. Seth and Norea are the direct opposite of Cain and Abel, who represent a broken, divided humanity trapped in matter. Instead, Norea and Seth are the true children of Adam and Eve and represent true spiritual awakening, enlightened humanity, finally emerging through the union of soul and spirit. And notice carefully what the text says right after Norea is born. Then humankind began to multiply and improve. All right, this isn't just a random line here, it's the core of the whole message. Only once humanity reconnects soul and spirit, represented by Seth and Norea, can humanity finally thrive spiritually. Only then do we break free from the chaos and distraction. And Norea symbolizes that inner divine wisdom that awakens humanity, helping us become truly conscious and powerful beings. See, this is a war within yourself, between ignorance and enlightenment. And Norea is the secret hidden inside you, the potential to truly wake up and reclaim your divinity. And her story was erased because the rulers of this world fear what you'll become once you recognize that truth within yourself. Now, here's where the story gets seriously dark. Everything that you think you know about Noah and the flood, throw it out the window, because according to the Gnostics, God didn't wipe out humanity because they were sinful, but because they were starting to realize they were divine. The text says, "The rulers took counsel with one another and said, 'Come, let us cause a flood with our hands and obliterate all flesh from man to beast.'" But there was a twist here, because they can't get rid of all the humans because they still want slaves. So Noah agreed to be the obedient slaves of these false gods in exchange for survival and power. He would inherit the earth, but under strict conditions, absolute obedience and eternal slavery for him and his descendants. Now, there's so much more to that story, but I've already talked about it in the video that I made about Seth, and you can check it out. But I want to get back to Norea. Now, Norea, she wants to board the ark, but Noah, who's in league with the demiurge, probably realizes that she's the whole reason the rulers want to flood the world in the first place, and so he doesn't allow her onto the ark. But Norea is not a powerless victim here. Listen to what she does next, because it's totally badass. Then Norea came to him wanting to board the ark. When he would not let her, she blew upon the ark and caused it to be consumed by fire. Yeah, you heard that right. Norea burns down Noah's ark with the power of her breath alone. Now, do you want to know something else cool here? In a lot of esoteric traditions, fiery explosive substances like sulfur are related to spirit, whereas water represents the unconscious and so is sometimes related to illusions. So this battle between the fiery spirit versus the waters of ignorance, represented by the flood, is deeply symbolic here. And did you notice something else that's really interesting about Norea? Her name, Norea, sounds a lot like Noah, doesn't it? That's not an accident here. Norea is basically the inversion of Noah. Noah, being associated with the flood, is all about water, obedience, and submission. But Norea, she's fire, rebellion, and liberation. If Noah is the puppet of the demiurge, playing by his rules to survive, then Norea is the wild card, burning down the ark, defying the rulers, and showing humanity another path. One leads to enslavement, the other to enlightenment. Anyway, after Norea goes full Charizard on Noah, he has to start over and build another ark. Oh, poor thing. But if you thought that was a twist, get ready, because it's about to get more epic than a Marvel movie. So the Demiurge and the Archons, they hear about all this, and they're pissed. And this is about to lead to a showdown. The reality of the rulers says, the rulers went to meet her, intending to lead her astray. Their supreme chief said to her, your mother Eve came to us. All right, so basically this is like a full-blown anime fight scene where the villain is monologuing about how powerful he is. The Demiurge himself is trying to trick Nerea by claiming that Eve willingly surrendered to them. This is a cosmic lie, and Nerea isn't having any of it. But Nerea turned to them and said to them, it is you who are the rulers of darkness. You are accursed. You did not know my mother. Instead, it was your own female that you knew, for I am not your descendant. Rather, it is from the world above that I am come. Nerea is explicitly telling them, hey, the Eve they claim to know, it's not her true mother. Why? Because the rulers never encountered the spiritual Eve, the divine feminine goddess who spoke through the snake and laughed at them. Instead, the Archons only ever knew the shadowy reflection, the material Eve that they were tricked into believing was the true spiritual Eve. Nerea's real mother is the spiritual Eve from the higher realm. But watch how the rulers react, because the Demiurge explodes into pure rage, basically transforming into his final form. The arrogant ruler turned with all his might, and his countenance was like a blazing fire. He said to her, presumptuously, you must service us, as did also your mother Eve. So this guy's a huge dick. He's trying to degrade Nerea to control her, but Nerea is about to go full Super Saiyan and responds with absolute power. But Nerea turned with power, and in a loud voice, she cried out up to the Holy One, the God of all, rescue me from the rulers of unrighteousness and save me from their clutches at once. So this wasn't some kind of humble, quiet prayer. This was a powerful, fearless command. Nora calls out, demanding immediate divine intervention from the true realms of light. And this is the moment where Nerea is showing the incredible power she has, because she knows exactly who she is, and she's beginning to figure out where she comes from, and that's what the Archons fear most, a human who has knowledge of what they really are. And so what happens next? A great angel descended. The great angel came down from the heavens and said to her, why are you crying up to God? Why did you act so boldly toward the Holy Spirit? Now, this isn't just some ordinary angel here. This is a powerful eon of light from the highest realms, one of the most powerful beings in existence. And remember, these guys don't come down to the realm of matter very often. But this angel isn't like mad or rebuking her. He's highlighting her extraordinary courage. He's basically saying, you realize how bold you're being, right? How powerful your demand is? Now, Nerea isn't really sure who this is and just directly asks, who are you? Now, at this moment, something critical is happening behind the scenes, because suddenly the Demiurge and his Archons, they basically have an oh shit moment and run away. The text says, the rulers of unrighteousness had withdrawn from her. The rulers ran because they realized that Nerea has access to a power infinitely greater than theirs. And now, for the first time, this great angel, this eon of light, reveals who he really is. He said, I am Alalith, sagacity, the great angel who stands in the presence of the Holy Spirit. I have been sent to speak with you and save you from the grasp of the lawless, and I shall teach you about your root. All right, so Alalith's presence here means that Nerea isn't just some random daughter. She is a powerful force hidden in human form. Alalith is basically like Morpheus. Nerea is Neo, and he's about to give her the red pill. See, when Alalith says, I shall teach you about your root, he's talking about her spiritual origin. He's gonna reveal the truth about who she really is and where she really comes from and why the rulers fear her. Remember, Nerea was born from the union of Adam, Saul, and the true Eve, spirit, which symbolizes the ability to look within and realize one's divinity. In other words, she is the representation of awakened humanity, the union of spirit and soul, the ultimate human being, and this terrifies the cosmic rulers because it means all humanity can wake up. Now, here's why this matters to you personally. Nerea's story isn't ancient history or mythology, it's your story. She represents the hidden potential in all of us. She's the part of you that can never be controlled or conquered. And when you recognize that Nerea symbolizes your true nature, you realize you don't belong to the false rulers of this world. You, like Nerea, come from the world above, the realm of light, truth, and knowledge. And when you understand that, you can never be controlled again. The church, they became the servants of the archons. And this is why they banned this text. This is why Nerea was erased from history, because her existence, your existence as a spiritually awakened being, is their greatest fear. Alright, so Alelith is about to reveal the secrets of the universe to Nerea. But before we hear what those secrets are, there's something that you have to know about what it has to do with you. Alright, so take a breath. We just went through a lot, a roller coaster here. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, how does this matter to me today? Isn't this just some crazy myth? Or is there something I'm supposed to do with this knowledge? Great question. And this is where things get even more mind-blowing. Because the hidden truth of the reality of the rulers isn't just about like archons, Nerea in ancient times. It's about you and your mind right now. So let's decode the symbolism a bit, because the Gnostics embedded these stories with mystical secrets. So everything in this myth is a mirror of a deeper spiritual and psychological reality. In fact, the famed psychologist Carl Jung once suggested that Gnostic myths are like vivid maps of the human psyche. He wrote that the Gnostics projected their subjective inner perception into a cosmogonic system and believed in the reality of its psychological figures. In other words, the Gnostics took what was happening inside the mind and soul and told it as an epic story of gods and demons. The rulers or archons, are they literally aliens or spirits out there, or are they symbolic of something within us? Think about the qualities of the archons: arrogant, ignorant, deceitful, envious, violent. Doesn't that sound like the worst aspects of humanity? Archons represent the shadow side of human nature, what Jung called the shadow self. Jung said each of us has a shadow, the unconscious part of us where all our dark traits and impulses hide, the stuff that we deny. In our story, the archons are literally called the authorities of darkness, and they work by keeping Adam and Eve separated, distracted, and blind, just like our own worst tendencies keep us ignorant or in denial. And then see, Adam and Eve represent our inner opposites. You can almost think of them like right brain versus left brain. And it gets deeper. The demiurge has a lot of different names, like Yaldabaoth, as well as Sakla, the fool, and Samael, the blind. Clearly, this represents blind foolishness. The demiurge is prideful ignorance, or basically our ego when it gets out of control and thinks it's the boss. See, the archons correspond to the archetypes in our psyche. Actually, Jung noted that the Gnostic idea of archons and powers closely resembled what he found in the unconscious. Basically, pieces of the psyche that act like independent personalities. What does that mean? Well, think of how sometimes your anger feels like a demon that possessed you, or an addiction feels like a little devil on your shoulder. Jung pointed out that terms like archangels, principalities, powers, all those heavenly or demonic beings come from the perception of the relative autonomy of the archetypes. In plain words, humans had a sense that forces inside of us, archetypes, can behave like independent beings, so we personified them as angels or archons in myth and legend. So the reality of the rulers isn't just some cosmic conspiracy story. It's actually a manual for inner awakening. The archons are in your own head. Ignorance, fear, the ego that thinks it's the only God. The demiurge said, "I am God, there is none but me." It sounds a lot like an inflated ego or narcissism, doesn't it? Those rulers in the sky have their analogs to the rulers in our mind, those that rule our lives. Take the Eden story in this light. The archons tell Adam and Eve not to seek knowledge, trying to keep them essentially happy idiots in the garden. That's like your inner demons keeping you from self-awareness. Don't look inside, don't question, just obey your desires and your fears. The snake, who's usually considered the bad guy, is actually your inner intuition or wisdom, saying, take a bite, see the truth, it's not going to kill you. It's that spark urging you to wake up. Now, Norea, as the unity of Adam and Eve, that represents your true self united and whole. She represents the voice that refuses to submit to all the BS, that rebel spark that says, hey, I'm more than what what society says I am. I'm from something higher. That's Nerea within you. And like when she destroyed the Ark, she also represents the burning flame that burns down oppressive systems. She's depicted as a literal character, but she actually stands for the awakened soul and spirit that calls out the false reality. When she defeats the demiurge and says, hey, I'm not your offspring, I come from the world above, this represents defeating the ego and connecting to your higher self. Now, with all that in mind, we can understand the hidden message behind Alalith's revelation to Nerea, because what Alalith is about to reveal isn't just Nerea's revelation, it's yours. Now, Nerea is standing face to face with Alalith, one of the most powerful spiritual beings in existence. And then Alalith reveals exactly who he is, directly to Nerea. He says, "It is I who am understanding. I am one of the 4 luminaries who stand in the presence of the great invisible spirit." The 4 luminaries are among the highest beings there are. Alalith is basically part of the divine inner circle, standing directly before the ultimate invisible spirit, the source, one of only 4 beings who directly serve the true source. And Alalith immediately delivers the most powerful message you could ever hear. "And these authorities cannot defile you and that race, for your abode is in incorruptibility, where the virgin spirit lives, who is superior to the authorities of chaos and to their universe." In other words, your true nature, your real self, is incorruptible, divine, beyond this false reality. You're not meant to be ruled by darkness and ignorance and chaos. You come from a place of pure spirit, pure knowledge, a place where darkness doesn't have any power. Now Nerea asks Alalith the most important question, the question that you're probably wondering right now. "Sir, am I also from their matter?" In other words, she's saying, hey, am I part of this material world? And Alalith's response changes everything. You, together with your offspring, are from the primeval father. Their souls come from above, out of the incorruptible light. That incorruptible light, that means that you and Nerea, symbolically representing your awakened consciousness, aren't from the material world. You come from the original source, the highest spiritual reality. You're made of divine substance. Your soul literally originates beyond this world, beyond matter, beyond darkness. And because of this origin, Alalith promises something astonishing. Therefore, the authorities cannot approach them, since the spirit of truth resides in them, and all who have known this way exist deathless in the midst of dying people. This means you're immortal among the mortals. Now, obviously not physically immortal. It's a spiritual immortality. It means you see clearly why others remain blind. You realize that you're part of the eternal realms, that you're not actually from this material world that is ephemeral. Now, the dark forces, they can try and get at you, they can try and distract you, but ultimately they can't corrupt your true essence once you've woken up. And here's what happens next, and pay close attention because this is your future if you choose awakening. Then they will be free of blind thought, and they will trample on death, which comes from the authorities, and they will ascend into the limitless light where this offspring belongs. No more ignorance, no more illusion. Death, the ignorance and spiritual bondage that the authorities imposed, that's all conquered. You rise above all this chaos, confusion, and you enter into limitless divine knowledge. You finally return home. And what happens to the false rulers when this awakening occurs? Then the authorities will relinquish their ages, and their angels will weep over their destruction, and their demons will lament their death. The entire system of control, every false belief, every oppressive ideology, all the lies, they crumble into dust. Their power collapses. Their reign ends. And why? Because the illusion's finally over. Humanity's free. And Alalith reveals the ultimate ending, the beautiful conclusion of humanity's struggle for awakening. Then all the children of the light will truly know the truth and their root and the Father of all and the Holy Spirit. In other words, humanity finally realizes its true nature, its divine origin. The illusion is over, and everyone who is awake can finally see clearly. This isn't just some ancient story here. It's a story of your existence. Because here's the secret they never wanted you to figure out. You were never meant to be a servant. You were meant to be a god. But this story, it focused on Eve and Nerea. What about Adam and Seth? Well, there's a whole nother side to this story in another banned text called The Apocalypse of Adam, and it's mind-blowing. Watch my video on it now.